Hey there, good afternoon, and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show. This is a show that's dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So we're starting out on our first day here in the Great Prog War. This will be the first battle of the two albums that were selected for me. The two albums selected today were, I don't have a prop for the first one, which is the UK's debut album versus Asia's debut album. So there's some similarities between these two albums. Obviously, John Wetton is singing on both albums, so that's the biggest similarity. So you have the same vocalist. They're both super groups, one from the late 70s, one from the early 80s. This particular album I've owned a fairly lengthy time. Well, not the CD so much, but the album I originally had. And I've been listening to this album for close to 40 years, although I would have to say in the last decade or so, not very often. The other album I've never owned, knew of it of course, my friend was big into these guys. They were probably, when they came out, they were probably just ahead of where I was musically. I hadn't reached that stage of prog music yet, and I didn't even like Hemispheres when I first heard it, so at that point in time I wasn't really into prog music. That album's quite a bit more proggy than the Asia album. There are some like really good guitar parts on here. I didn't know a lot about Alan Holdsworth until this project, but he's very good. Like I really like his acoustic ability quite a bit. He does an acoustic flamenco bit on, I think it's called 30 Years, yeah. Really nice, really proggy in spots on that song too. A couple other songs on the album I liked a bit were In the Dead of Night, real catchy, really kind of poppy song. And then I think it's called Presto, Vince, and Reprise. Another kind of proppy, catchy riff. So this is more. Those two tunes are kind of fit in well with the Asia bit. But the album is a lot more progressive, and actually there are some of the tracks, especially towards the end, like the song Nevermore, where he does a really nice guitar bit and acoustic flamenco type bit at the beginning. But there's also a lot of kind of jazz fusion-y sound to that one and the last track on the album. So I did listen to that album in its entirety and the Asia album in its entirety as well. You would think that this Asia album would win hands out because I have listened to it over a couple of hundred times and owned it. I've never owned that one, so you'd think it would be a landslide here, but not necessarily, because I've decided that I'm going to keep an open mind, and ultimately I'll determine which of these two albums is going to win by the feeling that I have for them, particularly for today. So the negative parts, there's actually one negative that's common to both albums. Well, there's a couple of them, but the first one is that John Wetton is on both albums, and I know that's not a great thing to say. I don't mind John Wetton. He has a great voice. He's a great bass player. He's played on some of the most notable bands in prog, and but he had a problem with Steve Howe on this album, so Steve Howe left. And he had a problem with the direction that, I'm going to say it was Alan Holdsworth, but it could have been Jobson that wanted to go a different, more instrumental direction, whereas he wanted to go more commercial. And eventually what happened is they decided to part company, and then of course Bill Bruford was out the door, which is another guy I like quite a bit. So he kind of bothered me on both occasions. So, but out of the positive of this is both, I didn't really care for Steve Howe's being in Asia, and I really didn't care for Bill Bruford being in UK, so I was quite happy for them to move on to better projects. So in the end it worked out. So this album, I was going to say my basic feeling about it is pretty proggy, a lot more instrumentation, longer songs, guitars are great. I think the keyboards are pretty strong here too, and of course Bill Bruford is amazing as always. there's not a lot of catchy stuff on this album, so there's not a lot of really kind of commercial sounds to it, which is good. But at the same time, when you're doing a one album comparison, sometimes hard to get into the stuff that you haven't listened to as much. This one, on the other hand, has a ton of poppy stuff. The album cover on this is, I think, better too, much better looking album. Has a lot more catchy stuff on it, and I'm a lot more familiar with the music on it than I am on that one. And so when I went into this, I thought that's going to win landslide. Then I decided to keep an open mind about everything and try to just rate on what I heard today. So I thought, well, this album's a lot more proggy, so it's probably going to beat Asia out, right? Well, I've listened to them both now, and I'm not sure about either of those points of view. For today, I would say, as much as I enjoyed the UK album for the first time through, actually I think I listened to it one other time during the week too, when I found out that we were going to be doing it. I started listening for different stuff. As much as I enjoyed that, I think this album just is, the better songs on this album are just more memorable for me, only because I've had more time with them. So this became a very difficult kind of thing to decide, and I would have to say, based on the stuff that I've heard and the direction that they're both going, I would probably have to give UK the victory today. Now, by a slim hair. Maybe if we come back in a month or two, it would landslide it. Or maybe I will not like it at all and the Asia album would win again. So this album loses today. UK album wins the battle today for the first battle of the tournament. This is a surprise to me. I don't know if it's a surprise to you guys, but it's a surprise to me. I did not think that would happen. So, we know that Steve Howe was on this album along with Jeffrey Downes and Carl Palmer and John Wetton, and that whole Holsworth, Eddie Jobson, Bill Bruford, and Wetton are on the UK album. I wouldn't normally pick somebody over Steve Howe, trust me, but in this case I just feel that album was better today. That's all there is to it. So moving on to round two will be UK's debut album. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, please subscribe, it's much appreciated. Give your comments. Who would you choose in this battle? What do you think of these two albums? Do you see the similarities? Are there things about it that totally dissimilar? Is this one so poppy that it's not really a prog album? Is that one so jazz fusiony that maybe it's not a prog album as well? I don't know, you tell me. Anyways, so that's it for the first battle. Battle 1 goes to the UK on their debut album. So I hope you have a good day, and we will see you tomorrow with Battle 2.